Well, last night at 1 in the morning, the police evicted Zucotti Park.
The police department in New York City and the folk over in Zucotti Park, I think, have had a really good, at least as far as I can tell so far, a really good working relation, right? They really seem to have arrived at a kind of understanding of one another and accommodation of one another.
Unjustified police brutality, and that's what I saw last night. My friend got pepper sprayed in the mouth because she was standing on the sidewalk that they were blocking off, and she was tweeting about what was happening. Just got pepper sprayed in the mouth. That is fucked up. That's fucked up. The tent.
Where it is, there were 5,000 books that were taken and just disposed of. You know, it's just. I don't know what to tell you.
He bought it.
Yeah.
He's in a third term, which is illegal in the first place.
But you still have election rights, so.
Right?
Yes.
Okay, so the movement, the Occupy Wall Street movement, from your point of view, does it imperil public safety or the community, the surrounding community?
Does it imperil public safety? Is that
Yes,
the question?
yes. Is there a clear and present danger?
Well, this is a complicated question. We don't feel there's a clear and present danger. What we're trying to do as a community board is, as issues arise, we're going to proactively address them. If there are issues, for example, about the late night drumming, we address that. The issues about the barricades, we will address that. The issues regarding sanitation, which we heard a tremendous amount about, we urge the city to put in bathrooms for the 9/11 memorial.
And there was just a lot of dispute over who was going to do what.
So Robert, who's right here?
In what?
Well, in terms of the legalities of camping out in a city park and having the freedom to do, in essence, what you want, and do, when do you infringe upon the rights of others? We'll talk about the businesses in the area in particular.
Right. Well, so you know, this is one of these classic areas, basically under the First Amendment, right, that we all have a right to assemble and to engage in political speech, and that basically government instrumentalities are quite limited as to how much regulating they can do when it comes to the exercise of First Amendment rights. On the other hand, of course, the sort of phrase of art that tends to be used in the jurisprudence here is that reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions on political activity and political speech are permissible under the First Amendment. And of course, the devil's always in the details, right? What does constitute a reasonable time, place, or manner restriction? That's not something that's very easy to come up with good general answers to, right? Usually you have to decide those kinds of things on a case-by-case basis, and that's why litigation in this area is always so difficult. That in turn, I think, is one reason why the arrangements that are often sort of converged upon in cases like this are often sort of pragmatic, give and take sorts of accommodations that are made between the speakers on the one hand and various authorities on the other. And you know, I have to say that there's the police department in New York City and the folk over in Zucotti Park, I think, have had a really good, at least as far as I can tell so far, a really good working relation, right? They really seem to have arrived at a kind of understanding of one another and accommodation of one another, and maybe one reason that you don't see the kinds of disputes in New York City that you see, say, over in Oakland, is because the police and the folk in Zucotti have made a real effort, it seems to me, to sort of arrive at an accommodation and mutual understanding. And so, you know, one of the things that's most inspiring to me when I'm over there, of course, is that, you know, you'll often hear in the GA itself, right, people will be saying, look, should we limit the time during which the drum circle meets, right, so that we can kind of retain friendly relations with the neighbors. And everybody seems to agree with that, right? Everybody seems to say, yeah, that's a good idea. And so the neighbors themselves, in my impression at least, is the neighbors of the park itself are actually quite appreciative of this fact. They're kind of moved by this. By the same token, I see members of the movement over in Zucotti making a real effort to be friendly with and thankful to and expressing their thanks to the police, right, for keeping them safe and for taking good care of them. So if you know, I think this sort of stands, this is a particularly interesting contrast, right, between Occupy Wall Street on the one hand and some of the movements in the 1960s on the other, right? At least if the history books are to be believed, it sounds as though there was a good bit of, or it looks as though there was a good bit of acrimony back in the 1960s between authorities, police, and so forth on the one hand, and say anti-Vietnam protesters on the other. One thing that's really quite different this time around, you know, again, if the 60s were as the history books seem to say that they were, is that you actually do have a real sort of pragmatic mutual understanding that's developed, a mutual respect that seems to have developed between the so-called occupiers on the one hand and the police and the neighbors on the other. Another neighbor, by the way, or another kind of neighbor that's had really good relations with the folk at Zucotti Park have been a lot of the local merchants and restaurants and so forth, right? So there's, of all things, you know, a McDonald's restaurant, right, that has been offering its restrooms to people who are in Zucotti Park. Other sort of local restaurants have actually donated food to the kitchen folk over at Zucotti. And again, this is not maybe what one would have expected if this were just some sort of crazy radical movement that was sort of against everything, as some people in the press, maybe I shouldn't say the press, but as some people
always our fault.
With political agendas have characterized them. Right?
Well, yeah, there's the wonderful thing about the police and these local businesses is that they get that it's not an us versus them thing. It's that we're all in this together and we're trying to affect change that affects all of us. And one thing I wanted to say about the legal aspect of this, I believe that there is because of its unique position as a park in the city and its proximity to the original trade center, there is some sort of an agreement between the city and the landowner that was signed when the park was created, that it must allow 24-hour access and egress to people 24 hours. So that's where this is very different from most of the other parks in the city.
So why do you think that the occupiers in Portland and in Oakland were evicted over the weekend? I mean, what's the differences there and here?
Well, the differences is, again, it's selective enforcement in some cases and over-enforcement of park curfews at gunpoint, and park curfews with tear gas canisters aimed at people's heads, rubber bullets aimed at their heads. And my understanding is that the parks there have been public, which is part of the statement that I think many of the occupiers are quite willing to make is, what is the constitutionality of a curfew in a public place that doesn't have the input of the public on its placement? And one of the problems is with police actions has been there's almost no threshold in saying something's a public safety risk, something's disorderly conduct. If a police doesn't want you on a sidewalk, they'll arrest you for disorderly conduct. You don't have to say anything, you don't have to do anything. All you have to do is be there. And there are some serious constitutional issues that are brought up that are staring people right in the face, that are not the constitutional and human rights issues of this, of being able to occupy a space that you as a taxpayer pay for, stand on a sidewalk that you pay for, stand on a park property that you pay for, so that you can assemble and discuss things that need to be discussed. It's not for anyone to say when you're done discussing these things. And that's why there may be time limits, but there also has to be reason to discuss and affect the change that people need to be doing. So the constitutional and human rights issues, even UN-sanctioned human rights, are being so egregiously and violently violated, and most of the time, the television media does not show it.